Hello and welcome to Tea Time with Joe. My guest today is Jason Woodruff, founder and editor-in-chief of The Pour Over, a Christian news organization that publishes an email newsletter covering current events and politics with over 600,000 subscribers. I met Jason 10 years ago, where we were part of Campus Crusade at the University of Iowa, and have been friends ever since. Jason lives in Iowa with his wife Hannah and daughter Bryn. Jason, welcome to the show.
Man, 10 years. We're getting old.
Yeah, I know.
We've known each other for 10 years.
Time flies. I do want to say that the founder of The Pour Over is drinking black tea in the Pour Over mugs.
Yes.
Jason is the OG. He's holding the OG mug. So once he started The Pour Over, that was the first. You hit 5 or 10 referrals and you would get that mug.
Yeah, 10. Still, we'll send that mug. And this is the logo. This shape of the mug is the original, and then they discontinued it. And we've talked about, because we at least aspire to be a premium brand, and you can get mugs for like 75 cents, and these mugs cost like $4 or $5. And then to ship them, like, we aren't making any money on the mug, because they're actually nice mugs.
Yeah. Yes. So you heard it here first, folks. The founder of The Pour Over is a huge fan of tea.
Black tea, done right. That's good.
That's it. All right, Jason, let's start from the early days. So tell us a bit about your childhood. Who's in the family? What was it like growing up?
Yeah, so I was born in Bellingham, Washington. I'm a Bellinghamster at heart.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we moved when I was 4, so all my memories of Washington, so Bellingham is north of Seattle and like very close to the Canada border. And so grew up with some Canadian friends and moved to, all my memories of that are like going back and visiting. I'm the youngest of 3 boys. Me and my 2 brothers are, Nate put it earlier this week, he was describing my brothers to someone, and he's like, every set of the Woodruff boys is as different as you think 2 humans can be. It's like you look at Ben and Jason, you're like, yep, they're opposites. And then you're like, oh wait, but Austin is also somehow opposite to both of them. There's this, we triangulate different personality types and stuff.
What about your parents? Tell us about your parents.
My dad is a pastor and has been for a long time, and he is not very pastoral, but he's an intellectual and leader pastor. So he's a senior pastor of a fairly large church and did business consulting before. And yeah, so he is...
Business consulting on like organizational leadership principles?
Yeah, so he was a college pastor and making like, I don't think this is a joke. I think they were making like $14,000 a year. And that was self-employed because it was like I forget the denomination of the church, but he was not ordained in that denomination. And so he couldn't technically be like on staff. So he like worked at this church, but was like a consultant. So then he had to pay, so he takes home like 60% of $14,000. And that was when Austin was born. And so they made no money and, genuinely had no money when they were first married. And like tell stories of, they invite people over and they're like, hey, can I have more coffee? And they're like, no, like this was my coffee for tomorrow morning that I kindly shared with you and we cannot afford more coffee.
They reuse the grind.
Right. But then went into management consulting, like traditional, he started his own consulting thing and did well and was suddenly making money. And then went back into ministry. He led an international missions organization for a little while that's now called Scholar Leaders. And he did that while I don't totally know the timeline, but he did that some while he was the pastor at Christ Church, which is where he still is. So in 1999, moved to Illinois, Lake Forest, and he came on staff at Christ Church and has been there ever since. And my mom stayed at home, and she loves sports and is very athletic. And
so she's disappointed in all 3?
Very disappointed that none of us played a sport with a ball. She loved playing soccer and basketball, specifically basketball, and none of us did that past 4th grade, which, yeah, and like she taught middle school girls basketball while I was in middle school, I think, and high school. Like she was just so deprived of good athletics. And she is super strong Christian, as is my dad, but bristles at the idea that people think she is a strong Christian or involved at the church because of my dad. Yeah.
Because she wants to be known as this faith is my own, not because.
Yeah, and like she had a very strong faith in high school and college and has always had a strong faith and loved God and been faithful and did not want to be a pastor's wife, and then becomes a pastor's wife and is like, yeah, I don't like traditional pastor's wife. She doesn't sing. She does not want to play a like just kind supporting role in the church. She's like, no, I'm just going to do this ministry because I like this ministry, and I'm going to disciple women and not just be kind and encouraging because I'm the pastor's wife. Like, you're going to need to, we're going to follow Jesus and be disciplined. And yeah, she has a great faith.
I wonder if you ever reflected on if that's made an impact on you, seeing her just be her own person and not just try and fit the mold of what's expected of her in this role of pastor's wife. I don't know if you've thought about that at all.
Yeah, not really. You know, it's weird. You know, your childhood just kind of is what your childhood is. And so like being a pastor's kid just is that was what was normal for me. And yeah, like my mom is what a pastor's wife is, you know, and I now see some of how that is different, and the like pressure that she felt to be a certain way that she kind of refused. But also it's like, that's just what is normal. And I'm sure shaped me deeply, but.
Yeah. How old were you when your dad switched back from management consulting to pastor?
3 or 4. Like, I don't remember him ever being a management consultant.
Gotcha.
Because when we moved to Illinois, for him to be a pastor at Christ Church. And yeah, honestly, those are some of my earliest memories.
If you're a little bit older, or maybe if you've talked to your dad, I'd be very curious, hey, finally he's starting to earn some serious money with management consulting. What tugged at his heart, or why did he, it must have been hard maybe to make that decision to go back into ministry. I'd love to hear what he would say about that.
Yeah, my dad and I definitely connect. Of the 3, my dad is closest with me closer to me than Ben or Austin, because I enjoy leadership and like asking that type of question, and Ben or Austin would be disinterested and never think to ask, or, you know, And so.
Have you had long car rides with just your dad and you would have time to ask him these types of things and connect with him?
Yeah, we've spent, and phone calls. He's very ADD, which was not diagnosed until I was in high school or middle school or something. And it was funny, so my mom finally was like, you need to go like get tested or something. This is ridiculous, because he had forgotten to pick me up for like the 3rd time or whatever. And she's like, I'm done with this. Like, there's something, like, you need to go. And so my dad goes and takes this ADD test, and he's like, at least publicly, a very thoughtful, reads a ton, you know, is writing sermons, is intellectual, meeting with people, contemplative, like, and so he goes to a doctor who goes to Christ Church and is like, hey, Sherry wants me to, you know, get tested. And the guy's like, you don't have ADD. And doesn't even like, and my dad's like, I know, but, and he's like, okay, let me ask a few questions. He's like, so you sit for long periods and like study and are writing a sermon? My dad's like, well, I'm typically writing like 3 or 4 sermons at once. And the guy goes, all right, well, let's take the test. and then goes and comes out and he's like, okay, so you're in the 1st percentile. Does that surprise you? And my dad goes, I mean, a little bit. Like I would have thought, and the guy's like, I'm worried you heard 99th percentile. You are in the first percentile. Like find 100 people and you are the most ADD person in that room.
Wow.
And my dad's like, oh, wow, yeah, no, that definitely surprises me.
That's quite incredible that the doctor who's at Christ Church in the congregation has seen Mike in so many...
From afar, but yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Was just right away like, no, I diagnose people with ADD and you do not fit the mold. But what makes it even crazier is he's in the top 1%.
Right. So, yeah, and I don't know what that is. Yeah, who knows? Because ADD, it feels like, is a new thing. You know, everyone has ADD now, and, you know, I don't know, maybe probably because of technology and other stuff. So to have, I mean, he's like 65 now. And so when he was 50 or something, was diagnosed with ADD, but lived for 50 years having no thought that he struggled with his attention, and just managed it by, yeah, writing 3 sermons at once. And so it's not like, no, I don't sit and like am steeped and do this. It's like, I'm reading and, oh, that'd be good. And just constantly. So like a long car ride with my dad is not, yeah,
Conducive.
It's, yeah. He'll like take a nap and listen to something and call and talk with people and have a conversation with you and do things. So like I feel like I know my dad well, but there's not like, oh, I remember this 2-hour conversation that we had. Doesn't really happen.
That's not how it goes with you and him. Yeah. I want to veer towards the news because obviously the Pour Over, which is a big part of you and what you do, is an email newsletter covering current events and politics. So was news a common discussion in your family growing up?
Not really. I really think, looking back, that both my parents had a pretty healthy relationship with the news. My mom definitely, and this is even that phrase, healthy relationship with the news, is something that is new in the Pour Over's vernacular and starting to be, we won't, because we've changed. We recently solidified our mission and re-solidified it at like different team meetings, but so I'm not going to bring it up because everyone would throw a fit. But I really do think that's kind of the purpose of the Pour Over, is to help people have a healthy, like a spiritually healthy relationship with the news. And I think that both my parents do. And I remember having news events explained to me and talking about politics in the sense that they're explaining how things work. I remember asking my dad when we saw a homeless person, I was like, well, there's so much money, why can't we just pool the food or whatever? Everyone gets like $1 and that can buy. He's like, yeah, so that's called communism. And explained that. And I remember him being rather disparaging of communism, you know. He would often kind of explain both sides, then be like, and this is why your mom and I think this way, but would explain both sides and was trying to help me understand things in the news, as opposed to like, there was only ever, you know, right-wing or left-wing news on, and it was always on, and it's like, we didn't have a TV upstairs. I don't ever remember listening to the news or watching the news or whatever. We would get newspapers and occasionally would talk about things in the news, but that was as much as it was. I was in high school. It was whenever the Boston Marathon bombing happened was the first time, because I remember like following that news story. I had a phone and could follow it and was just kind of fascinated by this thing, and they couldn't find the guy. You know, he and his brother bombed and killed all these people, and then they couldn't find him, and they were looking for him. And it was a water polo like weekend tournament, and I remember like downloading a news app and getting like breaking news updates because I wanted to know when they found this guy. And then I remember consciously thinking, oh, well, I'll leave this on, like, because, you know, like if Obama dies, I'd like to know or something. And I remember having this thought of like, I've never had this. And I start to get these like news updates and I was like, do I want this? And I was like, yeah, I actually kind of think I do like this.
And you kept it going for the rest of high school?
Yeah, probably. And
newsletter, or not newsletter, but the news alerts app.
Yeah, I don't even remember what it was, like which news outlet, but it was, but yeah, that was a low news intake. And then it was in around 2016 and the election and tons of news. And in the couple years after that, I became frustrated with my own relationship with the news and others, and just others in the news and people close to me, and being like, man, this like feels like we're doing this really poorly. And it has a bigger impact because at that point, I was in grad school. Well, yeah, I was in grad school when I started the pour over and when I really started to think about the news. And I intentionally shifted, like I was getting a lot of news from CNN and that was kind of my go-to source. And so I like stopped that and only got news from Fox for a while and watched myself shift on things. And for me, that was just because at the time I was sitting there saying like, oh, I can see that CNN is biased, but they're also reporting the news. And I was like, but I bet you that's how people who only watch Fox think. And so I like intentionally shifted, and it took a while, like it took weeks or months, but I remember again thinking like, wow, my views on this have shifted, and I like think much more negative thoughts of people and it's like, okay, this is scary, how just because I'm consuming a fair bit of news and I'm just getting it from one source and I'm watching it shape my view of people and the world and whatever. And so that was part of the motivation for starting the pour over, was to be like, I like the news. I feel like I have a high capacity for the news and it doesn't really affect me. And I'm not like, I don't ever really get depressed or anxious or particularly angry from the news, but I could see it shape me, And so saying like, what would it look like to have a news source where I'm not trying to figure out what a Republican or Democrat should think or feel about this. It's like I figure out both those things so that they can kind of cancel out, and then try to go to scripture and thoughtfully think through of, okay, what would Jesus do? What do I think Jesus would feel about this, and have that be the motivator. And I really love that.
Yeah, that's actually so intriguing that you would self-experiment. Going back to the story about how CNN was your primary news source, and you intentionally saying, I'm actually gonna experiment here on myself. I'm gonna cut myself off from CNN. I'm gonna get changed to the totally other side of the continuum to Fox, and then see yourself and assess, I am changing here, my thoughts and thought process and what I think about the other side. Do you experiment on yourself like that in other aspects?
I can't really think of examples. Like there are, I don't know if I'd call it like experiments, but there are times when it's like, I feel like anyone, like right now, and I'm doing really badly, but for 2024, one of my New Year's resolutions is going to be, I want to gain weight. And
same here, brother.
Yeah.
That's been my New Year's resolution since I was 10 years old.
Yeah, I've just always been tall and skinny. And I want to, okay, what would Jason at 200 pounds look like? And I've just kind of written off that like, I can't gain proportional weight like that, And it's like, so, but that's not really an experiment, But like in that, I have already experimented some of, okay, what if I just like basically only eat a ton of eggs and things like that, but not psychological experiments on myself. Yeah. That's not a common thing.
Yeah, but I think there's like an inherent curiosity that you have personally, whether it's experimenting on yourself or I want to see what this would look like if I try and gain this weight, and what are the different methods that I can go about it, and how do I feel and how do I look? Is it just fat that I'm gaining?
Right.
But just this idea of curiosity comes with experimentation. So maybe it's not just on your own, but maybe in the pour over that you guys are doing a lot of experimentation too, because you're just deeply curious on how doing this advertisement this one way and wording it a certain way will compare to just tweaking a little bit on this other side and seeing how that advertisement might run.
Yeah, I do really like testing and remaining open to the result. And it's cool, like the digital age allows you to do that so much. And it's fascinating to me how often I am dead wrong. Like most recently, the Pour Overs gift guide. So for Christmas, and there were sponsors, and then a lot of them, it was like a third sponsors, so people that paid to be on, or like our partners that paid to be on this specifically. And then the rest were like small businesses. And we had hundreds of applications and we picked like 20. And so there's inherently subjective picking of these. And we said, it's like, hey, we're just gonna pick the ones we like. And it's easy to weed out 150 of them because you can just tell, all right, you only have an inventory of 5 things. And yeah, but of the 20 that we chose, or of the 30 that we could have chosen from, or 50 or whatever that were good, like, you know, we chose 20, and some of them have done super well, and some of them that we chose that we obviously thought would do well and that I thought would be like excellent, it's just like, oh, well, I'm glad we didn't charge you anything because no one seems interested in this. And like, I thought this was a cool idea and I thought this was well done and whatever. And like, maybe we just failed to sell it and represent it well and whatever. I mean, there's multiple layers, but it's like, again, I thought this product was cool. I thought the way we described it was cool. I thought the method that we got it in front of people would work, and it just didn't. And then others like are emailing us that it's like this amazing response and incredible and so cool.
You would not have guessed.
Right. Like, there was one, it's just a necklace. And to me, it was like, literally, we had the conversation and thought of like, there was a ton of jewelry submissions and this is the best one. Hannah doesn't particularly like jewelry. I don't like jewelry. I was like, this looks like good jewelry. We'll throw something on. It's gone gangbusters. And she's like, this is incredible. It's changed everything. And I'm like,
good for you.
I can't believe this. Like, and again, it's great jewelry. I just didn't think anyone would be interested in buying a $30 necklace from a gift guide that we promoted. And we literally put it on there to be more balanced in what we put. And so like, yeah, it's just, that is, I love that. That's fascinating to me, the human behavior, like what people respond to. And so the marketing aspect of those things, and so we're working on this assessment where...
Before you go there, I think I want to pause, and could you explain for our listeners, can you give us a rundown of the pour over and how it works? So what does it look like from both the reader side and the company side?
Yeah, so we summarize the news, and we summarize the biggest, most visible news of the day. So we're not doing like investigative reporting. Our goal is to help you process news that you're already going to hear. So like I was saying, like you're going to, whether or not you're watching CNN or Fox or reading them or whatever, your coworkers are going to be talking about the election and the economy and mortgages are up and like Taylor Swift is on tour and all these things. And so it's like, those aren't necessarily spiritually valuable things or impactful things, certainly not the most spiritually impactful things, but they're what's being talked about. And so we want to summarize that, and then we pair it with brief biblical reminders. So a Bible verse and like a foundational Christian principle. So love your enemies, like, hey, it's easy to hate this person in the news. Sorry, we're called to love them. They're like, hey, this feels like a big deal, but we're gonna live forever in heaven. And when you take that approach, this probably doesn't matter, you know?
You're doing what your parents did for you.
Yeah.
The fact that you talked about, hey, why can't we pool all the food? That'd be enough to help others. And your dad was like, well, that's the principle of communism. And he explained both sides of it, but then also explained, hey, here's what mom and dad believe and here's why. I'm seeing the early days of how your parents delivered big ideas and news and politics to you in a healthy manner. It sounds like you're just making that connection for your readers.
Yeah, I think that's, I've never really thought about it that way, but I think that's a good way. Like, again, this is how I interacted with the news. And when I started consuming a lot more, I watched how it shaped me and was like, oh, like, I get why mom and dad didn't always have the news on, you know? Like, it's easy to become kind of obsessed about these things. And so then brought back my news consumption a little bit. And then it's like, oh, I was only consuming from one side, and see how that was shaping me probably more than like my relationship with Christ. It's like I would hear something in the news and I would immediately have an opinion on it that was driven by what that news outlet was trying to get me to feel. And it's like, it wasn't that I heard about this thing and I go, oh, what would Jesus think about that? It was like, I heard about this thing and I was told how to feel about it. And then I was like, wait a minute, some of these things, like, I don't think I actually should feel that way about it. Let me try this other thing. And then did that and was like, yeah, I don't think I should feel this way about some things either, you know? And I don't like that it's just all or nothing, you know? Yeah, but that is, and we really do, so we're politically neutral. And that's not because I think Christians should be politically neutral, but it's because all news, like, we measure all our news based on its political ideology, and we shouldn't. And like that shouldn't be what, that is how news is measured, but that is not what we should care about with the news. And so we clearly present both sides because everyone, yeah, and then try to just remind you of what is going on, or remind you of foundational Christian principles to add that perspective. And a lot of what we want is you to just consume less and care less about what is in the news. But we don't want Christians to know nothing. And yeah, so we summarize this 3 times a week. It's a summary, it's short. And if you consume no news, you'll be aware of what's going on. And if you are obsessed with the news, it would be a good detox because it's not nearly as much as you want.
Is that part of the reason why you guys decide on 3 days a week?
It's why we've stayed at 3 days a week so far. I mean, we started at 1 because that was what my capacity was. And it was just a personal exercise. It was me saying, like, I want to do this for myself. I'll summarize the news of the week. And moved to 3 because, like, if you spend 5 minutes 3 times a week, you will be aware of all the major things. You won't have constant updates on those things, but if you sit and, like, critically assess what is going on in the news, sometimes a lot is happening, and a lot of times nothing is happening, and they're just providing these tiny details and updates to things that you have no ability to impact. And so it's like, it's intriguing, but the Boston bombing is a great example. I did not need breaking news updates on that, and I did not even really need to know about it. There are serious problems and risks to the fact that we can find out anything that happened anywhere in the world as soon as it happens. And it's why there's national news and not local news anymore. There's like 2,000 newspapers that have gone out of business in the last 3 years. They're all local. And it's because local news can't compete with the intrigue of national news. But local news is way more relevant and impactful. And, like, just think about what that means. Like, we are choosing entertainment. Like, it's not that, like, our news is it's entertainment. We're not trying to learn things that are important to us. We're trying to be entertained, and finding the biggest, boldest story within a country is a lot easier. And, like, the biggest thing happening in the country is a lot more exciting than the biggest thing happening in Tiffin.
Right.
And then you expand it on a world level, and it's like, all we write about, like, for the last 2 weeks, all we've written about is the war in Israel, which is important, and it is relevant. It's important that you know what is going on, and we should be praying because prayer is powerful and important. But if that's the goal, if the goal is to be aware of what's going on and praying, do you need hourly updates to accomplish that? And what is the negative impact of you getting hourly updates? You're angry, you're anxious, you're fearful, you have more things to argue about with your neighbors. And like, none of those things are glorifying to God. None of those things are helping the war in any way. It's not like, oh, because I know this, not like
making some impact.
Exactly. Like, sure, like generals and I hope that the Pentagon is getting hourly updates on these things, but like, I don't need that. Right.
Doesn't need that.
And that is actually, it's not neutral. It's damaging. And so finding the correct amount of news and stepping back and trying to understand the purpose of following the news. Like, why do I read the news at all? And it's like, I would say the reason you read the news is, one, to find out things, to be aware of things that impact you and that you can impact. So like, a hurricane is coming your way. Good to know.
Yes.
Like, I can do something about that. Or this local politician has this stance and you're voting, or this politician that you can vote for has this stance and you're voting. Make a case for me that I need to know as much as I know about Gavin Newsom. Why do I need to know about a governor of a state I don't live in?
Right.
So I can be angry at California or like impressed by California. I can't impact California. I can't vote. It doesn't impact me. But tons of news and tons of the news cycle will be focused on what Ron DeSantis and new Florida law and new California law. And it makes people angry and anxious and breaks apart families and does things. And it's like, maybe there's some argument for shifts in culture and how you can talk with your family and whatever. And it's like, okay, but let's do a cost-benefit analysis of this. How much are you actually doing that? Like saying, I took this info about this new law in California or Florida, and I'm thoughtfully thinking about how this could impact me and my family, and having thoughtful, loving conversations about how we can care for others and do things. So it's like the actual impact of news that we consume is very low. So the other option is to be able to converse about it and shape people and engage with people. But again, our goal in those conversations should be to reflect Christ and to build relationships and love people well. And like, how can I take this news conversation and share the gospel through it, or grow closer to Joe, or encourage Joe, or whatever, you know? And instead, what it typically does is, how can I follow this news thing, come to a conclusion, and then go feel out whether or not Joe's on the same side of the issue with me, and if he's not, like maybe cut him off in this like self-righteous way and like ruin Thanksgiving dinner and all these things. So
how is that healthy?
Right.
Yeah. You open my eyes to, I've never heard of news as entertainment, but when you put it in that way, you know, like especially the breaking news alert type things, every hour hearing about the latest update, which is this tiny detail, but they've exploded it into this big deal that you need to know about. Dopamine. It's just like a dopamine when you compare it to entertainment, like social media. It's just this constant flow of, I don't know what's going to happen next, so I got to keep scrolling to see what's the latest update and what is something that I don't know about this thing, and just be hit with that. I never thought about news as an entertainment source, but I can see why, put in that way, it's so highly addictive, and therefore you need to, the big news outlets need to make it so that it's so engaging against the clicks and all that.
It is entertaining. It's great entertainment.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your, like, what would you say your relationship with the news is? Like, do you feel like, oh yeah, like, I have a pretty healthy, or like, I hate the news and I kind of avoid it, or yeah?
Yeah, it's a part of my life. I think it started growing up in Chicagoland. My parents would always have WGN News at 9 o'clock, and mostly for weather. They would care about, okay, here's the 7-10 day forecast.
Yep.
And they would always make comments about, oh, it's going to be cold or it's going to snow this upcoming weekend, yada, yada, yada. I would watch the news and the top story, living near Chicago, was always another shooting in Chicago.
Yep.
And there's some quote, I'm going to butcher this, but when 10,000 people die, it's the news. When one person dies, it's a tragedy. You just become so numb hearing the murder in Chicago over and over and over that you become apathetic to it. So that's something that I realized when growing up watching the WGN news, because the top of the hour, it was some homicide. And I wouldn't give it a second thought. It's just scary to think about. But then the death of one is a tragedy because it's probably someone you know and they're highlighting this one individual. But when you take the masses, it depersonalizes it, dehumanizes it, because there was that one important individual amongst the masses. So who cares about that one when there's like a mass shooting involved? So we watch it for the weather and sports. I'm a big Chicago sports guy, so I would really tune into that and care about what was this latest media conference that this coach or this player talked about. So I thought that was interesting because I was engaged with the sport and the player and enjoyed that. Today, I really limit my news intake to 3 email newsletters. So the Pour Over being one, you made the list.
Nice.
Morning Brew, which I know you're familiar with, and The Hustle. And honestly, The Hustle was just referred to me and I just haven't unsubscribed. And it's one of those, I'm too lazy to unsubscribe and also have this FOMO of once I don't have this other news outlet, what am I missing out on? But if I take an honest assessment, if I unsubscribe to that, I don't think it would really matter.
I think I have unsubscribed from The Hustle, not because of like anything they did, but similar to, because they do like a deep dive on different business news that you aren't going to find elsewhere.
Yep.
And I remember like really enjoying one in every 3 and finally just being like, it's well done, but it's too topical, like I either am interested in the topic or I'm not.
Yes.
And so I just kind of moved on. You should, if you like business news, I'll give a free shout out to another newsletter. Have you heard of Charter?
No. Oh wait, I have because you've advertised them.
I really like Charter. It's like, because they create charts and some news is just better in charts and it leans kind of businessy, but not always. And they'll do, I think 3 or 4 times a week and they'll have like a chart and then write a little bit about it. But it's cool because it's not like, it's by no means a comprehensive news source, but it's concise, but it also expands on something you've heard about in a cool way,
Yeah.
So like they'll do one that Taylor Swift was just named Times Person of the Year. And they had this cool chart of like the age by year, the age and gender of everyone who has won Times Person of the Year. And then they call out some specific people. They're like, here's Hitler and here's, and so like, it was just cool I heard that Taylor Swift won and I could go get this information elsewhere, but I can just sit here and look for 30 minutes and be like, or 30 seconds and be like, oh, this was interesting, and
it's nice
and topical, Yeah. So it's a fun thing. Or it's like, mortgage rates are so high. Here's mortgage rates over time, and it's like, oh, actually, we're like dead center of historical rates,
Right.
And so it's cool.
Yeah, I like that because it's putting objective data, because the news community is so subjective and opinionated, but then it's just, hey, what does the data actually say? So I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I hear the Charter CEO thanking you for making that pitch on Tea Time with Joe.
That's right.
Jason, what is it about the news or running an organization that makes your eyes light up?
So on the news side, it's all the things that we've kind of talked about. Like I just see, it's exciting to me to think about how impactful this could be for someone's relationships and mental health and relationship with God. Like something as simple as changing your news source really can like heal relationships that are broken with a family, you know? And
Do you ever get comments from readers about that? Can you share?
yeah, like one stands out. There was a girl, a woman that wrote in and said, I shared the pour over with my dad, who just consumed tons of only right-wing news. And it's like destroyed the family in the sense that like they never hang out anymore or whatever. And he texted the family and apologized, just saying like, hey, I realized that I've like he used the phrase like, some of these things that I've been caring about are important, but not God of the universe important. And I should have prioritized our relationships more. And she was like, in the pour over, that phrase, like God of the universe important, like this may be interesting, but it's not God of the universe important, was in the pour over that morning. And so it's like, that really is, I would say, the like hope of the pour over. And that's what makes my eyes light up about writing the news, is like, and it feels so obvious, but like we spend a lot of time, like that is our hope with the news. And we spend a ton of time through the editing process of going through and saying like, what is going to be offensive and like what is going to anger someone in this, and like how can we phrase it to make fewer people angry while still being accurate. Like we want to report that this thing has happened, but we don't need to say, you know, crazy Joe Biden or loony Donald Trump or whatever, you know. And it's like, or we don't need to be like these things are correct, and it's like, if we can make jokes about things that are not at anyone's expense and make it a little lighthearted, and if we can present the facts.
Is that because you don't want anger or annoyance or frustration as an emotion for someone reading it to inhibit them from just seeing the news as it is in a healthy way? Because if you have said something in a way that would have provoked anger, do you think about that because you don't want them to just stop at the anger and then just don't read the rest of it because they're angry about a way that you worded something?
That's a good question. We don't want, we want a thoughtful response. And again, going back to why someone is reading the news, like that person, there are things in the news that are frustrating and wrong, and we should be bothered and upset. But like the Bible says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. And it's like people talk about, oh, well, Jesus flipped tables. And it's like, Jesus described himself as gentle and lowly. And if you look at the entirety of his ministry and take away that I should go flip tables, like you have grossly misread the Gospels. Right. And so some of it is maybe an overreaction to that, of like, that is something that I'm passionate about. But saying like, we don't want you to leave angry from reading the news because we don't think that's a profitable emotion. Yeah. And I would much rather you read about this war or famine or whatever and be heartbroken and follow, like sometimes our Christian perspectives are like, hey, here's what you can do, like go support this organization or drive here and do this or whatever. And we don't want you to go support this organization because you're so angry. We want you to support that organization because you're heartbroken and want to make a change, you know? And like, it feels like that is the correct response. And also, we want you to converse about the news in a loving way that reflects the confidence and sovereignty of God, and not one that is doom and gloom, and if my candidate doesn't win, nothing will be right ever again. And so if you're supporting someone who's not my candidate, I'm angry at you because you're now, it's like, we don't want that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's part of it. And also, yeah, we just want you to be able to see and understand and actually know what's going on.
Yeah. So that makes your eyes light up on the news side. Is there something about running an organization? Because going back to how you are much like your dad, who was in management consulting, and you have your MBA, what about running an organization? Is there an aspect of that that makes your eyes light up?
I love, like I talked about testing and trying different things. I love business strategy, and I love being able to actually do things and try things and like,
and experiment.
And like, this was an idea that I had in grad school, the pour over, and it's like a game, but it like makes money, and you can tell whether or not you're winning and doing things and impacting people. And that's so fun to say, what if we, for a while, I don't know, what are some things that we've done? But what if we ran ads on this platform? Or what if I tried this and we see whether or not it works? And what if we launch another newsletter focused for kids? Would that be well received? And what if we changed the way, like what if we added something that was just like a fun clickbaity image or GIF at the end of every email? And it called it whipped cream on top. And it's 100% of the time the most clicked link in every email. And like people open the pour over and skim the news and click.
See if there's
It's like, oh, there's gonna be a funny dog doing something. And it's like, wow, we like boosted engagement and our open rate because of this thing, you know? And it's like, that all is super fun. And
I am curious, can you give us insight into how you capture ideas like that? Is that just throughout the day you have a voice memo and you're saying, Jason, try this idea? Do you spend certain hours of the day where you're thinking about jotting down ideas? How does that happen?
I will have ideas, and I now, as a rule, write them down in my notes app. And someone was asking me, they're like, how do you organize your notes app? It's like, there's no organization. It is like, I basically create a new note for every idea. And it is, the purpose of the notes app is to make sure I don't forget it and move it to some more lasting. So it's just this like, sometimes the sentence not even complete. It's just this graveyard of like random things that I couldn't even tell you what they mean. And then what I often will do is I'll talk with someone about it, and this isn't, I'm thinking through this now, this is not a like defined process that I take, but I'll like call Nate and pitch this idea, or talk with Hannah about it, or you, or whatever, and just kind of bring it up and see what the response is. And because well over half the time, I'll mention something and people's eyes will glaze over and they just won't care, or they'll be like, oh, well, what about this? It's like, oh yeah, man, that's a fatal flaw in that idea, you know?
How many times have you pitched it to the first person, let's say Nate, and he's pushing back on it, but you just went for it anyways? And because you still felt strongly, like, okay, there's an N of one, that's one person's opinion about it, but I just need to see it in the masses. How often do you just carry it through, even though you have your sounding board that is like, don't do it?
Typically, because sometimes, like, I'm not super passionate about the idea. You know, like sometimes it's like, oh, what about this? And then if the first person's like, that's stupid and I don't like that, then I'll be like, yeah, I didn't really like it either, you know, and move on.
Yeah, that was a terrible idea.
If I have some excitement behind it, then I'll just talk with someone else or try and like rephrase it and be like, because to me, a big part of it is, like everything we're doing with the pour over needs mass appeal. Like we're trying to, like the pour over is for Christians in America. I mean, depending on who you believe, there's like 200 million of them, you know? And
do you have a worldwide following, by the way? Do you have readers outside the US?
Not significant. Yes, there are people that read it globally, and there's like a not insignificant contingent of Canadians that will write in. And
you lived right near there.
I know.
Your ages birth through 3.
That's right, Bellingham. So
Hometown hero.
hometown hero,
Woodruff.
yes, international business mogul. But like, so decaf was an idea. It's like a smaller audience. Hey, we're focused on parents and family. But like whenever I talked with parents, and like there would be some intrigue or like, oh yeah, that would be cool. And so some of it is, if I can't pitch the idea, it's a bad idea inherently, because like, or I need like, even if the idea is good, if I'm unable to pitch it and motivate people around it, then it is not worth pursuing. But there are other times that I just think people are wrong and we go for it. But typically that's not me in isolation, but I'll give an example.
Yeah.
We have, in 2024, we are going to push a challenge, like a news cleanse or whatever, 59 days. And we're testing it with some people now. And universally, the feedback has been that the challenge is too hard and it requires too much time. And those people are wrong. and I have actually added more things to the challenge.
You're doubling it down.
Yes, because it's, and so here's the challenge as it stands today. And is to say, you read the entirety of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7, every day. You spend 5 to 10 minutes in the news and no more. You spend 10 minutes praying after reading the news. And once a week, you do some random act of kindness or outreach to someone that you believe is going to vote differently than you. And universally, the feedback has been, that just takes a ton of time. We don't want to do it. And we're not, like, this is too hard. Like, tell me to read one chapter of the Sermon on the Mount and pray for the news. And after that feedback, I'm like, no, actually, I think we also need to say you can't be on social media and like no podcasts with any.
Except Tea Time with Joe.
Right, no podcasts where you're interviewing like people on current events, which we're not interviewing about a current event.
Right.
And it's 59 days.
This reminds me, didn't you do some challenge where it was no sugar?
75 hard. So that's part of the 75 hard sucks. It's ridiculous. No one in their right mind would do it. And I did like 75 medium. I did like 60 medium. But 75 hard is, yeah, you have to work out twice a day, 2 45-minute workouts. You have to drink a gallon of water, no alcohol. You have to be on a diet. You have to read like a chapter of a nonfiction book and take a picture every day. And if you don't do any of those,
start over.
You have to start over. And
so are you taking concepts of that to apply it here?
So like, I think the principle is 75 hard is appealing in some sick way, you know, of like, and I think the reason it is appealing is because you look at that and you go, yeah, I would like be in better shape and better health if I did that. It's ridiculous, but like that would work. I acknowledge that it would work. And that's the premise that I want to take into this like political peacemaker challenge or whatever, of saying, yeah, it would be easier for 75 hard to say, and maybe get wider spread adoption, but I don't think so. But it would be easier to say, you know, stand at your desk and walk for 10 minutes and eat an apple. That would be easier to achieve. It would not transform your body in the way that 75 hard does. So if you're saying, I want to gain muscle or I want to lose 20 pounds or whatever, it's eating an apple and walking will not accomplish those things. Like there is an absolute level of, no, you need more transformation to be transformed. You need to do something harder to experience the results.
So as a reader of the pour-over, this Peacemaker Challenge, is it, hey, call to anyone who wants to participate, here's what we're doing. And it's just this way that readers who are sick, like you said, and amped up about this challenge, to be even more engaged with the pour-over?
It's so similar to 75 Hard. Even they do not recommend that you just do this indefinitely, you know? And so the thought is that we'll certainly offer it to the readers and explain it to the readers, but some of it is just going to be a outside the pour-over challenge for people, and maybe like a lead gen, like we hope that people will come subscribe to the pour-over. And I've mentioned this assessment that we're creating, that's gonna be part of it, is like, take this assessment, understand where you're at, and then basically we'll provide like, hey, based on this assessment and the answers you gave about your relationship with the news and God and others, here's one thing that you can do that will help. Or you can solve the problem, you know? And it's like, hey, like if you want to be healthier, saying, hey, you should get a standing desk. Like that's one thing, like you're living a very sedentary lifestyle, or you should always take the stairs or whatever. Like that is a good thing and does point you in the right direction. You will see some benefits. It will be good and it's very achievable. But if you want to lose 30 pounds, if you want to say, I am angry and anxious and depressed and obsessed with the news, and friendships are being lost, and I'm not talking with my son.
I'm ready for a change.
You don't need like, hey, you should consider praying for 5 minutes after you read the news. It's like, that is a good thing. That will not repair your relationships. That will not remove your anxiety. That will not reduce your anger to the level that you're talking about. But if you cut back all your exposure to the news to 5 to 10 minutes and follow that up with praying about what is going on, and then you force yourself to think about, here's this person that I disagree with, and I'm going to go love and be kind to them and try to nurture this relationship. And if you, on top of all that, are spending more time and becoming saturated in Jesus's word, as opposed to Fox or CNN, you will, and you do that for 59 days based on Matthew 5:9, blessed are the peacemakers. If you do that, you will change. You will notice a difference. You will be more calm. And like you will reduce your anxiety and your anger. And imagine if all the Christians did this. And if in 2024, Christians, when there's so much anger and anxiety, Christians were pockets or little like pieces of like, they were absorbing anger and anxiety. And it's like, you're fired up and you come talk to me and I don't reflect that back or fire you up more. I listen and care, and it ends with me because I have a lasting peace that surpasses understanding. It doesn't make sense that I would be peaceful in the midst of this chaos, but that's what the Holy Spirit provides and promises. And it's like, okay, let's get that. Let's be focused on that and absorb anger and anxiety and love you despite the fact that I think you're dumb, that I think you're voting for the wrong person, that I think you're the problem or part of the problem. And it's like, that's okay. I'm going to invest in this relationship and yeah.
That was an amazing pitch. I get it.
You're on board?
Oh, yeah. Once you define who this is for, because as you said, the person who is just so anxious and stressed and consuming the news frequently, and they're allowing it to impact them in such a way that it's manifesting in how they treat other people or their views on other people or their family members. Once you defined who you have in mind, especially primarily for this challenge, it makes total sense of why you are doubling down on the method.
Because it needs to work. Like it doesn't need to be it doesn't need to be achievable. It needs to be, if it is achieved, it's successful, you know? And the hope also is that it will be you who, best I can tell, have a relatively healthy relationship with the news and with others and with God. And you would probably take our assessment and see that you're like a peacekeeper, maybe not a peacemaker or something like that. And like, but you're in a good spot. yeah, and depending on your stage of life and season of life and whatever, maybe you go like, oh man, I got like 2 pieces of thing, like this was helpful for me to see that I spend more time than I think consuming the news, or that, you know, it actually has impacted some of my relationships, or here are a couple things that I can do. That would be total success for us. But also, a lot of the people that take 75 hard are already jacked, you know? Like, they're already in good shape, and they're not trying to say, I'm getting up off the couch and I'm gonna go do this. They're saying, I wanna challenge and I wanna grow deeper in my relationship with God and have an excellent relationship with the news and things like that. And I think that appeal will mean ultimately more people take it, because when people take it and it works, they'll then talk about it and share it. Whereas if our recommendation is you go eat an apple and walk, that's not going to transform your life. You're not going to share it. You're not going to talk about it.
It's quite amazing, I think. Anyone on the periphery would view the pour over as, hey, it's a 3-day-a-week email newsletter, putting things in a concise way, neutral, and just reporting out the news, but then highlighting some eternal perspective. I think talking with you, when you look deeper, it's amazing how much you guys can influence and impact people's day-to-day lives. Because someone who is consuming the news 24/7, they might not be aware of how it's seeping through on lashing out on someone else, you know? But just the fact that if you can change their consumption of the news, highlight it in a lens that's a lot more of a healthy filter to pass through, they won't lash out. They won't be as stressed. They won't be as anxious. That's an incredible mission that you guys have.
And that's really, that's really what we're specifically in 2024 trying to help more people see. And that's like, because right now, you're right, we are a newsletter that summarizes the news 3 times a week. But if we can help, not only like, if the pour over is a resource that is helping people have a healthy relationship with the news, and people who are reading the pour over are aware that that's what we're trying to do and that's what is being done to them. Like, I love my job and my work and whatever. But it's not doing everything I want it to do, in the sense that I want more people to be changed and experience this kind of freedom and joy. And so it's like, okay, how do we appropriately view what we have and not just assume that if we wrote a book, people would jump all over it, because I don't think they would. And so it's like, okay, well, how do we get to that point where people would start asking for a book from the pour over? Because no one's asking for a book from the pour over. But like, how do we set ourselves up and position it? And that's just a fun game. There are rules, but there's just endless possibilities and ways to get there. And it's like, and how do we do that and monetize it? And monetize it in a way that people are like privileged, like so excited that it only costs $10 to do this thing, you know? And then we can spend that money to reach more people and do things. And it's like, that is the organizational leadership stuff, that like that strategy that really makes my eyes light up of how can we do this? And you know when you're winning. Like, the pour over runs at, we can charge an insane amount of money for ads, because if we find the right product and it connects correctly with the audience and we are able to connect it correctly, they'll buy a ton of the thing. And then the advertisers like loves us and thinks it's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Take all my money. And we're like, cool, now we can like go reach more people. And it's like, we've won, we've done this thing, this was successful. We had this theory that if we build an audience and find great products and connect them, that would create value. And it did. And like, now we can try to do it more.
Wow, incredible. I heard on a different podcast that you'd like to run for office someday. Is that true?
Yeah, I think I will probably run for public office at some point.
What's the main motivator?
A lot of what we've already talked about and similar things. And I think it's frustrating to me that politicians, again, stoke anger and just feels like they're focused on the wrong things. And to say, like, what would it look like to try to be productive instead of like virtue signaling and looking for a soundbite and just raising money and accumulating more power, you know? And I think that a good politician in the right position, and there have been examples of this, that they have been a great healing force, you know, and a unifying figure, you know? And so like, I think that type of thing of saying like, okay, how can we set aside some of these things that are bothering us and just like policy, when done well, can really impact and help people. And we just see so little of that. And so saying like, what are things that we can all agree on and help implement? And then also just model doing things in a way that glorifies God, you know? And it's not just that we are fighting for what is right or working towards what is right, but we're doing it in a way that a God that described himself as gentle and lowly and would be proud of, you know? Like, that is appealing. Yeah.
With corruption in politics and politicians and their focus on raising money, how much do you blame the person versus the system of, much like with the pour over, you guys are playing this game and you can see how you're doing. I wonder if the game of politics has been set up in such a way where you're incentivized to keep doing what you need to get reelected and just to maintain office. And
Yep.
It's what the behavior that we're seeing is reflected in the motivation and incentives. So whether it's short-term thinking and just appealing through maybe anger or passion that really engages top followers, that they need to maintain this persona and vote a certain way and not look across the aisle to make amends and compromise because the game's rules are set up such that. How much do you blame the politician versus the system?
Yeah, I mean, there's a good chance I don't win. Or if I win, that I don't win again. And who knows if I ever even run. But I think both those things are, the system is both the institution of a lot of things. There are, I think, intentionally high hurdles. Like, it's hard and expensive to run for president, for example. Like, you have to get on a ballot in all the states, and if you want to be on, that's basically cost prohibitive unless you have a ton of money or the RNC or DNC paving the way for you, you know? And so like, there are people that would be great and that just like mechanically can't do it. And so that is a legitimate issue. Yeah, and then just politically, you are, at least right now, rewarded for a lot of the wrong things. And so whether or not that drives good people out of politics or just means good people can't win or turns good people bad, which I think certainly happens, both those things are true. And that's why I think there needs to be a posture of, one, like some pressure on the timing and following the Holy Spirit to say, hey, I am doing this for the right reasons and doing this at the right time. There are certainly things like, I hope and see that it is very possible that as the country becomes more divided, it will become politically appealing and advantageous to be boring and open to compromise, you know, because like people don't like where we're at. And so if someone were to step up and be like, yeah, I'm gonna have like both parties in my cabinet because I'm trying to represent the entire country. Like for decades, that's never happened. But like, why not? You know, like why would if I was elected to represent this district, what do I think that there's only Republicans or only Democrats in the district? Why would I not have people on staff that are advocating and representing for these people, you know? Like, yeah, so.
Yeah, it's going to come to a point where there's so much, it's ripe for change, ripe for a candidate that is just In our eyes, not extreme on either side is just kind of boring, like you put it.
Right. A not extreme person, because I'm just not an extreme political person. I spend a lot of my time trying to understand both sides and talk in a way that doesn't bother either one of them so that they can see the actual message. And so it would take a lot of rewiring and learning for me to, like, I am trying to tell the news with broad appeal, and it's so interesting and so the opposite of what we do to think about, like, man, if I ran a news organization and my goal was to only appeal to this group and to just not care that I am saying things that are inflammatory to this group, is so the opposite of how we think, you know? And it's good. I mean, like, we cite those sources and do whatever. It's helpful to understand what both sides are thinking, or all different sides are thinking. It's just not how I'm wired. And so there's a good chance that there's no appetite for someone like me. But I think that also should be part of people running for office, you know, of like, this is what I'm about. If I don't win, I don't win, and I go on and do something else, you know, like, and I'm not desperate to be elected or reelected.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can think this is dumb, but my issue that I look for in a candidate, or a stance that I look for in a candidate, is they're all about instilling term limits.
Yeah.
That I think I look at it as there are a lot of things in the system that incentivize and cause the bad behavior. And so term limits being one real example of, if you install term limits and, hey, politician, you can only keep going at a certain point and then you're just done. So would that help increase some better behavior? The other thing, I think some states have tried this, is ranked choice voting. Oh, I know, like Ireland. I don't know if other states.
I think Alaska does it.
Okay. But that's another one where you have to see.
Easy.
Yes. You have to be knowledgeable about every candidate, not just one, because that's kind of lazy. You just know who you're going to vote for and you just cast your vote there. But ranked choice voting forces you to really understand all the candidates on the ballot, because you're going to have to rank them.
And it removes the excuse, which even that is the wrong word, because this is very legitimate, of like, if you don't vote for one of the major parties, you are throwing your vote away. And so then there's this pressure to be like, oh, man, I actually absolutely prefer this third candidate, but I'm not going to vote for them because they're not going to win. Whereas in ranked choice voting, you can put them as number one, and then when they are likely thrown out, then your number two vote counts. And so it's like, I can put, and it solves that problem, which I think is, yeah, I think term limits. I actually think a tighter age window, because the only valid argument I've heard against term limits is in some, like, jurisdictions and locales that it's been done, if you have too short a term limit, it just shifts all the power to lobbyists and stuff, because they will end up with the institutional knowledge. And if you only have people in there for 4 years and it's a massive job, and the first 2 years you're just figuring out which way is up, you lean on the people who have been around, which is the special interests and stuff like that. But I mean, that's just solved with longer terms, like saying, like, hey, but there still should be some limit. You shouldn't be able to make a career out of it. And then the other problem that we have right now that is relatively new is people in their 70s and 80s. And like, how old is Chuck Grassley? It's like, he seems relatively shrewd for his age. But the problem with, I think he's like...
Producer Zach, could you look that up?
I think he's, yeah. The problem is, even if he is bright and sane now, he is 90. And we elected him to a 6-year term. I love 96-year-olds. I have no issue with them. The problem is, what do 96-year-olds do? They die. They, like, lose their intellect overnight. Like these things can happen when you're 94, when you're 90. And so the fact that he's fine now, it's like, and so if we just had a firmer cutoff to say, we have an age minimum on all these things, 25 for a representative, 30 for a senator, 35 for president. What if we just have an age cap? That instills limits.
I need to bring up a story. So I hung out with some neighborhood guy friends, and one of them is a U.S. Marshal. So he helps protect judges in federal courts. And I was fascinated by what he does and his career path. And so I asked him about benefits and pension. And he said that in his job, he has to end at 57 years old because he's carrying a gun. And they take that privilege away from you 57. Like they've already said, hey, if you're older than that, you shouldn't have the responsibility of carrying a firearm. And right away, my mind went where yours did, is there are people much older than that in a position where they can enact policy that have huge effects.
We don't let airline pilots, you can't be a commercial airline pilot after, it's a low age. 51. Yeah, it's like you're in your 50s and they're just like, you're done. And yeah, here we are. And what's hard is like, I get, Chuck Grassley's a great example. I understand why he was reelected. And because he has immense name recognition. So who can run against him? And the people, whoever was running against him, had Chuck Grassley's name. I don't even remember this guy's name, but Chuck Grassley's name was on his yard sign because you had to say, it's like, you know, Jason Woodruff can defeat Chuck Grassley. Like you have to, Chuck Grassley is synonymous with Iowa senator in Iowa because he's been the Iowa senator for like 100 years. And so there's one, you just can't, name recognition is huge. Two, Iowa is a rather forgettable state, unimportant state as far as states go. And we have one of the most powerful, influential senators because he's been around forever. He's in line for the presidency. So why would, like, there is a incentive for Iowa to keep, because he's chair of these important committees, he's in line for the presidency, he's immensely influential. And so to say that we're gonna stick some 32-year-old in, like Iowa loses a lot of its voice. And so of course we're gonna vote for the 90-year-old. And you know what? If he runs again when he's 96, who knows? Maybe we vote for him again because like people lived to over 100.
Yeah, centurion in U.S. federal position.
And it's like
65
on airline pilots.
Traffic controllers, I believe, are lower because they have to manage.
Yeah.
Thanks for the fact check.
Yeah. So finding those and understanding the unintended consequences and thinking through, because like, I understand why there weren't term limits. You want institutional knowledge. And if they can, the term limits, the check is the voters. Like, well, the voters just shouldn't vote in someone who's going to be old and die. It's like, well, we know that that's not the case because there are other institutions and powers that be, and you just can't overcome. We're going to have likely 2 presidents running against each other because who can, of course, the incumbent, it wins the ticket, you know? It's like, who can unseat a sitting president in their party, and you effectively have that with both parties, you know, like you have, so we're going to end up with Biden versus Trump. And that, even when you poll and like 65 to 70% of the country says, we don't want this rematch. And so, but it's like, you don't want this rematch, but that's what's going to happen because of, so like the voters won't vote and they'll check and balance, like it just doesn't work. Same thing, like you get all these things that are good in some ways, but have these unintended consequences, like there's no term limit on a Supreme Court justice or any judge. And it's like, I love that in the sense that, yeah, they are apolitical. They don't need to be reelected. They transcend the political cycle. also, it allows for a 105-year-old who can't sit up to be one of the most powerful people, you know? And it's like, so you have to try to think through these things, and we don't want to destroy the good that these things are doing of like, oh no, we should just elect Supreme Court justices. It's like, oh, you think it's political now, you know? Like, preserve some of the brilliance of how it was set up, but also be willing to adjust and improve, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. Does Hannah know that you have aspirations of running for office?
Yeah, I made her look at me in the eyes and confirm that she understood before we got married, because I will mention it. And I was like, I'm not saying I'm gonna do this. I want you to know that, like, I'm not joking. Like, I do think that I'll do this. She's like, yeah, okay, I get it. So
People are gonna vote for you because you're Hannah's husband.
for sure, yes, yeah.
And bring it back to our earlier discussion. I hope Hannah, if you are elected office, pursues her status like your mom does.
That's right.
She's not, your mom is a pastor's wife, but she's not the traditional pastor's wife.
Yeah.
And assuming those expectations, I hope Hannah, and I bet she will, do the same thing. I'm not just Jason's, politician's wife.
There was a great, on that note, Rosalind Carter, who just died, her grandson gave her eulogy, and it was like Mrs. Trump and Mrs. Obama and Dr. Biden and Mrs. Bush. And so the grandson is going through and saying, like, says all those names, and it's like, thank you so much for being here. And then she goes, and Dr. Biden and Mrs. Bush, thanks for bringing your husband. It's like,
awesome.
That is the perfect scenario. Yes, it's like, this is the funeral for a first lady. We're not even gonna say the word president. We're not even gonna acknowledge the presidents in the room. They are important because of their marital status to the first lady.
Love that.
Lovely.
There you go, there you go. Jason, do you have any book recommendations, favorite books that you have?
Yes, two. One, Unoffendable by Brant Hansen. Super easy read and expands beautifully on the sentiment of like, hey, anger is rarely righteous, and it does a great job on that and is super readable. And then the other is The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. And
love that book.
Yeah, my endorsement for that is the vision he paints of Sabbath rest and of taking a Sabbath. Like, once you read that book, you will not view it as a command. Like, you should rest on. It will be like, oh my gosh, why? This is the most beautiful, amazing thing. Why is this not my top priority?
Yeah. Okay, knowing that you work on Sundays because you have a newsletter coming out on Monday morning, do you Sabbath on Saturday?
Yep. So I stop working at 1 o'clock on Friday, and then start working. So I take a half day on Friday, I don't do any work on Saturday, and I take like a half day on Sunday. I'll write the newsletter on Sunday, but don't do any like business work. So I edit and do that, but nothing with sponsors and growth and stuff like that.
Yeah, awesome. I love that book. All right, I'm gonna transition to some rapid fire questions. You up for this?
We'll do it.
Okay. What is one piece of leadership advice you've been given that's so remarkable?
The phrase, to be unclear is to be unkind. And like when thinking about staffing and stuff, it's like, hey, it is not kind and helpful to not tell people what they're doing wrong or to sugarcoat things or whatever. It's like, give people feedback and allow them to get better and flourish.
That's so good. What is your best leadership quality?
I think willingness to test and follow to come up with an idea and really like it and shop it around and be like, yeah, that wasn't one of my good ones.
I've seen that theme just in talking to you throughout your whole life. What's one thing you're really excited about right now?
2024, man. Political divisive mess is good for business and exciting potential.
We're here for it. The pour over will take us by the hand and walk us through the mess.
That's right.
Tell me one thing you're deeply grateful for right now.
Hannah she's a great mother and is a very intentional mother, and that's great and makes it fun to be able to go to work or do work and come home and know that Bryn is being cared for so excellently and intentionally, and then get to like join in that, like when I'm not around all the time. I'm very grateful for her.
All right, finish this sentence, these sentences. It all comes down to
Discipline and consistency.
pressure comes from.
Expectation.
Are you a rule breaker or rule follower?
I'm a rule follower.
Okay, and finish this one. I am
a follower of Christ, not a member of a political party.
Love it.
Very on brand.
Very on brand. I think this is a great place to wrap up. Jason, thank you for coming onto the show and for all of your support with this podcast. Any final thoughts or things you'd like to say?
No, this was fun.
I'll have my referral link to subscribe to The Pour Over in the show notes. If you'd like to listen to their podcast, just search The Pour Over Today. You can find them on social media at The Pour Over News on Instagram. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.